Hello, everyone, and welcome to an episode of the Dairy Signal. As always, or selfishly, I believe we have great content coming ahead of you. And again, a reminder, if this is your first time or you're a seasoned pro to the Dairy Signal, we want to give a couple shout outs before we really get into the thick of today's content. First and foremost is a sincere thank you to our partners that help put together and bring forth programming throughout our calendar year, such as the Dairy Signal, which is also another highlight or call out to DMI, who is our event sponsor specifically for the Dairy Signal through this month of August and even carrying into September, truly saying how important and impactful they believe the Dairy Signal is for you. So if DMI, if you have to scratch your head or hopefully just slow down and hear that out, again, Dairy Management Inc., it's our national checkoff program, doing a lot of great things for dairy across the country, making sure it's a top of mind when you think of your dinner plate, you think of the dinner table, making sure that dairy is a staple part of it. And if you want to know or connect more with them and their team, make sure you check out the Dairy Checkoff, dairycheckoff.com. So again, DMI, thank you for being a sponsor of the Dairy Signal this month and carrying into September. As we go into today's segment now, thank you to Dr. Paul Fricke for joining us again, always at the forefront when we think of repro, when we think of our heifers, our cows, just great things coming down the pike. You always have something new, exciting, or just even fine-tuning ways that we've done them in the past. So thank you. Thank you for joining us once again here on the Dairy Signal and just honestly being a great partner with professional dairy producers. So thank you. Thank you for joining us today.
You bet, Cassie. It's just a real pleasure. Thank you for the invitation. I've always enjoyed doing these podcasts, and thank you everybody out there that's joined. The topic today, I've got a rather long title, so I'll just read it to you. It's the effective timing of AI relative to a synchronized ovulation or increased activity on fertility and lactating dairy cows. And just as by way of introduction, this is an old topic. It's been around for a long time, and I would say this is still in my almost 30 years of doing extension with dairy cattle reproduction, this is still one of the questions I get most often. Breeding cows is something that happens on farms every day, and the question is always, when do we put semen into that cow to optimize things? And we have a couple different ways that we can breed cows now, and so I'm going to go through some concepts that most of you are familiar with, but it's good to review them. And then I'm going to finish up with some new data that we have that just came out in the Journal of Dairy Science that really discusses these two issues that I'm showing here. Okay, so to get started, I'm often asked to troubleshoot conception rate problems in dairy herds. And when I go through that, there's four different kind of buckets that I think about as I troubleshoot that problem. So I'll just read them off here. It's the timing of insemination. That's the first one. The second one is AI efficiency. That is everything to do with the inseminator, okay, the breeder, how they're thawing semen, where they're placing semen, how semen is being handled. The third issue is male fertility. And if you're using artificial insemination, that's the best way to control that one. But hopefully there's not too many natural service bulls still out there. I know that there are. That can be a major issue with the natural service sire, male fertility. And then the final bucket is this idea of female fertility. And that's really where everything else goes. There's lots of things in that particular category. But the one I want to talk about to do is this first one, timing of AI, timing of insemination. That refers to the timing of insemination relative to behavioral estrus and or ovulation. So I want to go through these two different things, estrus and ovulation, and just talk through them. So on the screen, I've got a picture of two cows engaged in estrus activity. We have a mostly white cow that's standing to be mounted and a mostly black cow that is doing the mounting. And I always like to ask people that see this picture, which of these two cows is in estrus? And most people get this right. It's the cow that's standing to be mounted. But then I ask a second question. Which of these two cows would you put semen into? And that's where things get a little dicey. Some people will say, okay, we're going to breed the white cow that's standing for sure, but just maybe we'll breed that black cow because she never quite stands. She's always messing around and she's doing the mounting. And I always say, our primary sign of estrus is the white cow. It's the one that's standing to be mounted. If you bred the cow that's doing the mounting, you're going to get lower fertility. So what do we know about this standing activity? There was some work done back in the mid 1990s by a guy by the name of Ray Niebel, very famous reproductive biologist. He's retired now. Did some great work in this area. And what they found is that ovulation occurs about 27.6 hours after the very first standing event of estrus. Okay. Now, with estrus, there's going to be some variability about that. That's a plus or minus 5.4 hours. But one thing we know when we see a cow standing to be mounted or we catch the first event, we kind of get an idea when she's going to ovulate. And then that tells us when to inseminate. Insemination must occur before ovulation to allow time for sperm capacitation and transport. Okay. So that's just laying the groundwork of this event that we see in dairies. When artificial insemination first came out, it was a new technology. People normally had the bull do his job, but artificial insemination is the way that we mostly do inseminations now. And I think they needed a hard and fast rule for farmers to follow. Okay, so they came up with this thing called the AMPM rule. Now, we all know and love the AMPM rule, but I'm trying to kill off the AMPM rule so nobody ever thinks about it again. Okay, but let's review the AMPM rule. A cow observed in estrus in the morning or in the AM should be inseminated 12 hours later in the PM. Pretty simple. And then by contrast, the cow observed in estrus in the afternoon or evening or in the PM should be inseminated 12 hours later the next morning. So why do I say that I'm trying to kill off the AMPM rule? Let's look at where this recommendation actually came from. Now, those of us that work with reproductive biology have searched the literature to try to figure out where this recommendation came from. And most people, most of us would say it comes from this 1943 Nebraska Agricultural Experiment Station, bulletin number 129. This is Trimberger and Davis, okay? And the first thing that I'll point out, there's some data on the screen here. They didn't include enough animals in each of these categories really to tell anything, but nonetheless, I think they got the answer right. So they've got a category here. If you breed cows at the start of estrus, conception rate was only 44%. If you bred them at the middle of estrus or the end of estrus, it was at 82 or 75%. Those are really high, too high, actually, by the way. And then they have a bunch of different categories after estrus. And so if you breed them at 6, 12, 18, 24, 36, or 48 hours after estrus, you see a precipitous decline in the conception rates. But this is really where the data comes from for this AMPM rule. If you can breed them kind of in that middle or end of estrus, which means, you know, that's what I was saying before. If the cow's in heat and she's going to ovulate at 28 hours, if you wait about 12 hours, you know, this kind of works out. The problem with this is we don't know when we see the first standing event. And so there was this is Ray Niebel's data from 1994. They had a large group of cows. So they had over 3,500 cows that were bred strictly to the AMPM rule. Okay. And then as a comparison, they had over 3,500 cows that just were inseminated once daily. So like a tail chalking program. So you chalk your animals and then your breeder's going to show up once a day and it's just going to breed all the ones with road tail chalk. They'll re-chalk them. Okay. So it's strict adherence to the AMPM rule versus once daily AI. Their measure of fertility, because of the nature of this data set, was the 75-day non-return rate. Many of you are not old enough to even have heard that term before, probably, but that's what we used to talk about. No difference in that measure of fertility between strict adherence to the AMPM rule versus once daily. There's another data set here from another group, AMPM rule. This is in heifers versus once daily AI. Not as big of a study, but again, conception rates were 62.9% versus 62%. Okay, so there's no advantage to strictly adhering to the AMPM rule. And what I like to say about once daily AI versus the AMPM rule, both of them are equally as bad, is I guess what I would say. Neither of them is better than the other. But, you know, if you can do once daily AI, it's a heck of a lot easier than the AMPM rule. And this really used to bother the AI companies because, you know, a breeder would come and show up to breed a cow that was in heat 12 hours before, and another cow would start mounting, and the farmer would say, hey, you got to be back here in 12 hours to breed this cow. And so it just logistically didn't work, and it's not necessary. So let's just review. Again, this is a topic that I've talked about for 25 or 30 years. So this is nothing new. let's review timing of insemination to a visual estrus. Number one, it's not necessary to strictly adhere to the AM/PM rule. Okay, we don't have to do that. Number two, once daily AI programs result in acceptable fertility or equal to the AM/PM rule. Now, this is true for conventional semen, but I would say it may not be true for sex semen. And we'll talk about sex semen a little bit later, but sex semen is quite different than conventional semen. One thing I'll say right now is I think farmers are trying to use sex semen the same way that they use conventional semen, and that can cause some problems, okay? Number three, a cow observed in estrus can be inseminated immediately rather than waiting 12 hours. And this is because most people don't catch the first standing event of estrus, especially if you're just watching once or twice a day, okay? So there's no need, if you see a cow in heat, to say we got to wait 12 hours to breed that cow. You can just, it's almost impossible to breed her too early. Again, so that's just review. Cassie, I'm sure being the reproductive expert that you are, you would say, hey, this is stuff that I've heard before. Is that right?
Never call myself an expert in any field, but this does seem pretty traditional baseline.
Pretty traditional baseline. This is bread and butter. This is the bread and butter of reproductive physiology as far as catching cows in heat and when we're going to breed them. Okay, so we're going to move on. In 1995, the repro world changed. Richard Pursley and Milo Wiltbank here at Wisconsin invented the OVSync protocol, okay? So the OVSync protocol, I'm showing it on the screen. I think most of you are familiar with it. GnRH, 7 days later, prostaglandin, 48 hours later, GnRH, and then time to eye. Now, that's the way that they did the protocol. That 48-hour period has changed, and I'll talk about that in a minute. But, this protocol, I think one of the biggest problems with this protocol when it first came out is cows aren't in estrus. People didn't trust it, right? They were used to breeding cows to estrus. Now we can program this. We can synchronize the cows. And when you go to breed the cows in this protocol, most of them are not going to be in heat. Okay, so just getting people to put semen into cows that weren't in heat was a big deal. But what I want to talk about here, these guys that did this paper way back when in the mid 90s, they chose a 16-hour time period between the last GnRH and time insemination. And here's the question: where did that recommendation come from? Okay, where did that recommendation come from? And I'm going to walk you through a study. This is maybe the second or third study that was done with OVSync by Pursley and Wiltbank here at Wisconsin. And what they did is a classic experiment. They had an OVSync protocol, and they had groups of cows that they inseminated at different times relative to that last GnRH. So they had a group that was inseminated at 0 hours at the same time as that last GnRH, and a group at 8 hours, 16, 24, and 32 hours, okay? Back in the day, they had about 150 cows per treatment, a little less than that. That was a big experiment. We would have said that's huge. But this 150 cows per treatment isn't as big as you might think. The other thing that I'm showing here on this is that, remember I said from the onset of estrus, ovulation is going to happen at about 28 hours. That's about the same for that last GnRH. In other words, the last GnRH treatment of a timed AI program physiologically is about the same as the first standing event of estrus. So they're going to ovulate between 24 and 32 hours. So the reason I bring that up is because we want to breed before they ovulate. So we kind of know that this last group inseminated at 32 hours is going to be bad, okay? So let's go through the data. Now I'm showing a bar graph. So I'm going to read through the conception rates of these different times. 0 hours conception rate was 37%. It went up to 41% at 8 hours. It went up to 45% at 16 hours, back down to 41% at 24, and then down to 32%, which is the lowest at 32 hours. Okay. Now I've colored these bars. Any normal human being looking at this data would say, well, it's clear 16 hours is the best time to breed them. That's the highest number. But we have this funny thing called statistics. And there is no statistical difference between the 0, 8, 16, or 24-hour groups. You cannot statistically say that those differ. And that's an interesting kind of thing. When we see new data and we go back to the old data, we see these things and go, well, that's kind of the way that worked. The other thing that we can take away from this is breeding too late at 32 hours is the worst. It's worse than all those other time periods. Okay. So nonetheless, a recommendation had to be made early with OffSync. And so we've said breed cows at 16 hours. I've said that. I can't even tell you, Cassie, how many times I've told farmers we want to breed them around 16 hours. And yet the question is, well, you don't need to stand there with a stopwatch saying, Fricky says 16 hours, wait, go and breed them all, right? Not possible. So, and I think this is where the question comes. If conception rates aren't where you want it to be, one of the first questions I get is, well, are we breeding at the right time? Okay, so this is kind of where I'm going with this. Now, a funny thing happened after OffSync came out. There is no desire. Here's my quote: "There is no desire greater in heaven or on earth than the desire to alter a synchronization program." Okay, so everybody wants to change these things around for all kinds of reasons. And one of the things that started happening, there's two things. Okay, I'm showing on the screen two different protocols. At the bottom is this OffSync 56 protocol. So let me just read through it. Monday morning, you give GnRH. The next Monday morning, you give prostaglandin. And then Wednesday, if you push that last GnRH to an afternoon, you can breed Thursday in the morning. And this modification was made because breeders want to breed in the morning. So just delaying, rather than using a 48-hour interval from PGF to GnRH, push that to 56, push that GnRH in the afternoon, breed the next morning. This has been our recommendation for many, many years. However, everybody wants to alter a protocol. So there's this thing called a co-sync protocol. Let me just read through the protocol. You would give GnRH in the morning, 7 days later, prostaglandin in the morning, 2 days later, GnRH, and breed the cow when you caught her to give GnRH. Okay, it simplifies the protocol. It's easier. Maybe it's more fun to do it this way. I'm not certain. But the question that I get from breeders, from farmers, how much do I lose if I do this co-sync protocol compared to doing it the way that we recommend it? And this study is from 2008, long time ago now. The conception rate for the OffSync 56 protocol was 36%. It was only 27% for the co-sync protocol. That's 9 percentage points lower. That's a lot. That's a lot for conception rate. In fact, if you go from a co-sync protocol to the OffSync 56 protocol, you'll get a 17% increase in pregnancies. Okay. Now I'll just tell you a little story. I was out in Idaho, and I don't mean to, if anybody's from Idaho, I loved it when I was out in Idaho, but some of these large dry lot dairies, co-sync protocols are just easier, and they do them. And they were not happy with this message that I was giving them, that this is not the optimal way to do things. And it's not just a small difference, it's actually a big difference. Okay. One more thing about co-sync, and this is not science, this is anecdote. Okay, so this is just somebody came to me and they said, we have a 1,850 cow Holstein dairy herd in Wisconsin. All the cows are set up for a timed insemination for first breeding. Now, what we're doing now in the industry is we're using sex semen and conventional beef semen. Most people are kind of using those two semen types. And what was happening on this dairy is that sex semen was yielding 26% conception rates, which are incredibly low with an expensive product. Sex semen is quite a bit more expensive than conventional semen. And yet the conventional beef semen was at 54%. And I asked them, I said, what are you doing? They were doing co-sync. And I said, okay, just humor me. Let's move to an OffSync 56 protocol. And they said, well, we don't want to do that. And I said, okay, just humor me. Let's do that for 6 months. And they did that. And here's what happened. Sex semen jumped from 26 to 51%. And beef semen went from 54 to 58%. And the reason I show you this is because this is something I've run into more than a couple of times. So co-sync protocols, I think, with sex semen may even be worse than with conventional semen. Okay. So what you're hearing from me is stop doing co-sync. So if there is one big kind of message at this point in my talk, stop doing co-sync. In fact, I did a Hordes Dairyman article back in June 2nd issue. You can look back at it. It's in the Hordes Dairyman Intel, a little blurb on this. My take-home message, I know co-sync is fun and easy to do, but let's stop doing that if we want to get good fertility. Is that clear, Cassie? We don't want to do co-sync.
I think so. Got
Okay,
it.
good. All right, shifting gears. The dairy industry has radically changed. If I would have told you that we'd be breeding our high-producing lactating dairy cows with beef semen 10 years ago, people wouldn't have known what I was talking about. I'm showing a graph of domestic beef semen sales. It really jumped in about 2017 from just under 3 million units. And in 2023, it was pushing almost 10 million units. And so, of the 9.4 million units of beef semen sold domestically in 2024, 7.9 million units were used in dairy herds. It's just kind of phenomenal. Last time I looked, I think the top 2 sires used to breed dairy cows were Angus sires. Sex sorted dairy semen was at 9.9 million units, and conventional dairy semen was at 6.2. So there's a lot more sex semen used than conventional. And in fact, this is from data from 2023. I probably should. This actually came out in a graph in 2024. I just think the amount of conventional semen is going down, and sex semen and beef semen is going up. So it really has caused a lot of things to happen. And I'm just showing here. This is an article from Dairy Herd Management. Holstein Springers are hitting $4,200, and beef crossbred calves are surpassing $1,600. And this is something that's just really shifted the way people are dealing with things on dairies. And I've been to a number of different dairies, chatting with people this summer, and this is what's happening. People are using a lot of sexed and a lot of beef semen. The value of those calves is very high. And so we took a look back in 2023 of how sexed and beef semen is being used. So I put a complex graph up here. We actually put this in a Hordes Dairyman article. It's published in Dairy Science, but lots of breedings, 8.2 million inseminations from over 3 million Holstein females from over 9,000 herds. And basically what this graph is showing, the majority of our sexed semen is being used in non-lactating heifers. As animals get older, still first lactation and second lactation animals, I think we're seeing more sex semen being used in those groups because we're using about as much as we can use in the heifers. So we're seeing more in those first and second lacs. And then beef semen use is opposite of that. Okay, less beef semen in the younger animals, more beef semen in the older animals. And so this has really kind of launched us into a whole new area of repro. And one of the things, another concept that I want to bring up, a lot of people are talking about this idea that we should inseminate later with sex semen. And I think a lot of people have kind of heard that message. And again, I went back to some studies to try to figure out, where did this idea come from? And I'm just showing the titles of 2 different papers. And one thing I'll say about these 2 papers is that they're not randomized controlled studies, they're observational. So what they knew, and they're both in Jerseys, lactating Jersey cows, they knew when the cows were coming into estrus based on an activity system. They knew when they were inseminated. And so what they did is, there's a lot of variation there, and they just said, okay, let's look at the different intervals and try to decide what's best. And what they both kind of concluded is that it looked like breeding a little bit later after the onset of activity was the better fertility. Okay. Now, I'm not going to go through all the physiology with this, but it may be that in cows showing estrus, particularly high-producing cows, the interval from the onset of activity to ovulation is getting stretched out a little bit. So this might be true for estrus cows. Okay, a little bit later might be a little bit better. We did an experiment, though, to...
So clarification, Dr.
Yes.
Fricke, on those studies, they were specifically looking at lactating cows. They weren't looking at virgin heifers.
Not virgin heifers in those 2 studies. Yep.
Okay, thank you.
And that's good, because we may get some questions on heifers too at the end here. Okay, so we did an experiment, and the way we tested this was we set up cows on a timed AI program, because the one thing we can do with the timed AI program is we know when they're going to ovulate, because we force it to happen with that last generation. And so here's what we did. I'm showing on the screen a double OVSync protocol. We went to 3 different herds in the upper Midwest here. And double OVSync, just like I told you before, the last GnRH is in the PM, and the time to eyes the next morning. In the AM, that gives us an interval from GnRH to time to eye of 16 hours. That's what we've recommended forever. So that's our control group. And remember, we're trying to see if breeding later relative to ovulation is better. And we did something strange. We didn't change the time of AI because the breeders wouldn't come back to the farms. They wouldn't breed half the cows in the morning and come back in the afternoon. So we changed the time of GnRH, that last GnRH. We moved it to a morning, the morning of the day before the time to eye. So now our interval from that last GnRH time to eye is 24 hours, which means we're breeding later. We're breeding closer to the time of ovulation. If they ovulate at 28 hours, we're breeding at 24, only 4 hours before they ovulate, versus 16, which is more hours before they ovulate. Okay, so that's how it was done. And I always like to say we've had really good ideas. This was not one of them. If you breed at the right time at 16 hours, conception rates were better than if you change that protocol. So there was a 14% decrease from 50 to 44% at the first preg check. There was a 17% decrease from 48 to 41% at the second preg check. So what I tell people is that if you're using sex semen in lactating cows, in the context of a time to eye program, don't change the protocol. Okay, don't change the protocol. I'm just showing on the screen, this is some data from Ireland. I did my sabbatical in Ireland in 2014 and worked with this guy here, Stephen Butler. They did a very comparable study, but they shifted the time of AI. So from the last GnRH to time to eye, it was either the time we've always recommended, 16 hours, versus delaying it until 22 hours. So very nicely designed study. They had 3 treatments. They had a conventional semen treatment, the sex semen at 16 hours, and the sex semen at 22 hours. So I'll make 2 points here. The first one is sex semen yields about 80 to 85% of the conception rate of conventional semen. That's my 85% probably is what I usually say. So there's always a bit of a reduction in fertility compared to conventional semen. But there was no statistical increase in fertility when they delayed timing of insemination. And in fact, there's a number of different studies now that have kind of tested this hypothesis that breeding later relative to ovulation is better, and none of them show that that's the case. Okay, so that'd be my second big take-home point. If you're using time to eye if you're using a time to eye protocol in the context of sex semen and lactating cows, just do what we've always said. Get that last GnRH in the afternoon and breed the next morning. Okay, so that's my second major point there, Cassie. So hopefully I made that clear. Is that clear?
I think so.
Crystal clear. Okay. All right, now we're going to get into the new data. So this is a paper that just came out a month or 2 ago in the Journal of Dairy Science. And what we did is we analyzed 3 different data sets. So there's one experiment that's a randomized controlled trial that we did here in Wisconsin. And then there's 2 large, what I call observational data sets, all looking at when to breed cows using sex semen or conventional beef semen. So let's go through these. The first experiment is an actual experiment done in Wisconsin, 6 different large herds. They're all on a double OVSync program. And we randomized those cows to either get a co-sync. So we went back to the horrible co-sync. We did a co-sync or at 16 hours. Now we did this for a different reason. There was a company that was trying to encapsulate sperm so it lasted longer. So there's a reason we did this. But anyhow, half the cows are done with a co-sync, which is fun and easy, versus at 16 hours. So here we go. There are 2,225 cows from 6 dairy herds in Wisconsin. You can see with the protocols here, we've got the co-sync protocol. On a double OVSync protocol, the co-sync protocol yielded 36% conception rates. That's not good. If you do that 16-hour time period, it was 46%, which is much closer to what we like to see. 10 percentage point difference. That's kind of over and over what we see. That's a 28% increase in pregnant cows. So Cassie, this is a big deal. We don't
Yep.
want to do co-syncs. You lose a lot. I mean, that's the question that I'm getting all the time. How much do we lose with the co-sync? You get 28% fewer cows on that, which is a lot, Okay. So that answers that question. Second experiment is an observational experiment. Now, this was done in large herds in the South. I've got it on the next slide. But imagine that you're a very large herd. Say you have pens of 300, 400, 500, 600 cows. What that means is when you go to do a double OpSync program, there's going to be variation, natural variation in the interval from GnRH to time to AI, just because you got a lot of cows, right? You send people out and they're not going to be done in the same order. And so on this very large farm, the variation in time from GnRH to time to AI was anywhere from 13 to 23 hours. Okay. So what we did is what's on the screen right now is what we call the raw data. This is the data that came off. And it's very interesting nowadays with the RFID tags in the ear and timestamps and all that kind of stuff. You know, when someone wands the cow to breeder, we know what that time was. And when they wander to give that last GnRH, you know that time. And we just do the math. Okay. The surprising thing, now there's two things. The height of the bars is the conception rate. On the left is sex sorted semen in pink. On the right is the conventional semen in blue. The line on these graphs shows the number of breedings at those different time periods. In other words, in each bar. So they're trying to hit that 15-hour time period. Lots of cows bred there. Not as many cows bred outside of that. But the surprising thing to us is that it's flat. There's not a big difference. So we take this raw data and we do a statistical analysis and look at all the effects. And I'm showing a couple lines on the screen now, and they're just flat from 13 to 23 hours. There's really no big difference in fertility. Okay. So this is good news for dairy farmers. You don't have to stand there with a stopwatch saying we've got to breed these cows at 16 hours. If you get semen into them between 13 and 23 hours, you're in pretty good shape. Okay. So that's another big concept that I want everybody to get. We've got more time than we used to think. We don't have to be exactly at 12 hours or 16 hours or 18 hours. We've got from 13 to 23 hours. All right, the last data set then is experiment 3. This was done on a couple of large dairies in the southwest that had activity monitors. Okay, so this is, Cassie, another really big question I get. So I've got an activity system. What happens, when do I breed them relative to that estrus alert? Because lots of farms now have these systems and they're great, right? They're watching 24/7. The biggest problem with these systems is they don't do anything for the anovular cows, and there's a bunch of those. So that's a different talk. But when do we put semen into cows? So again, I'm showing the raw data, and cows were inseminated in these farms. So let me just read through the title here. There was 927 Holsteins, 3,238 Jerseys, and 6,762 crossbred cows. And this data set represents over 20,000 inseminations. So big observational data set. Cows were inseminated anywhere from 0 to 40 hours. And what you now see, it's not flat, it's curvilinear, okay? In other words, if you breed too early, you get lower conception rates. If you breed too late, you get lower conception rates. So that's both the case for sex sorted as well as conventional semen. And so what we did is we said, let's do the statistical analysis, and you get these curves. And I'm showing these curves on the screen. And, we're going to publish this in the lay press, so it'll be out there. But I encourage anybody with this question to look at these graphs, because you can kind of see where the optimal is. And so just for the fun of it, we chopped out the 13 to 23 hours that I had shown you before in that experiment in both of these data sets. So what you're seeing is a frowny face, I guess the best way I describe it, right? You breed too early, it's lower. There's a peak in the middle, and then it really drops off if you go late. So if you chop out the 13 to 23 hours to breed from that estrus alert, again, it's flat as a pancake. Good news for the dairy industry. You've got a window of time that you can put semen into cows for optimal fertility. However, This is about a 12-hour time period, which means if you want to be optimal, you need to generate lists of cows twice a day, once in the morning and once in the afternoon. Otherwise, you're just going to take the average across that 24-hour time period, which is not going to be as high as this optimal period. And people have been asking me how big of a difference that is. I haven't calculated that. Probably at least 5 percentage points, which is quite a bit. Okay. One last thing we did just for fun with these estrus alerts, we said, okay, if the cows that were bred too early, 0 to 2 hours, versus kind of the optimal, that peak, 15 to 16 hours. For beef conventional semen, it's 38% if they were bred 0 to 2 hours, 49% at 15 to 16. That's a 29% increase. And if you look at sex semen, it's a bigger difference. It goes from 37% if you breed from 0 to 2 hours, all the way up to 54%. That's a 46% increase. Again, so there's a big difference here when you start to kind of parse these things out. Timing of insemination matters. That's what I would say. Okay, so I'm going to show you my last slide. I kind of just put together a bit of a visual so that we can think through this. The last GnRH of a timed AI program or the onset of estrus activity is about the same kind of a physiologic event. Cows are going to ovulate somewhere around 28 hours after that. We want to breed relative to this ovulation. So here's what the data that I've showed you says. Breed them 13 to 23 hours before ovulation. If you do that, you're going to get the highest fertility. Sperm viability can limit fertility, but sperm are viable for 24 to 30 hours. And that depends on the bull, depends on a lot of things. Sperm viability generally isn't a major problem unless you're breeding too early, and I'll talk about that. The thing that really limits fertility is the oocyte viability. From the time that oocyte leaves the follicle, it's going to be caught up into the oviduct. It's going to go from the fimbria, it's going to go halfway down into the ampullary isthmic junction. It's going to sit there and wait for sperm. And the viability of that oocyte is about 6 to 12 hours. Okay, so here's what this means. If you inseminate too early, we get decreased fertility because the sperm has got to sit there for too long. You're dealing with an aged sperm problem. Okay, that's why you get low fertility if you breed too early. If you breed too late, you have decreased fertility due to an aged oocyte. You know, because even if you breed them at the time of ovulation, you got to have time for sperm transport and capacitation, and the oocyte's going to be aged at that particular point in time. So it's a nice visual, just to kind of think through this. So let's just go through the last little take-home messages. Number one, correct timing of insemination is very critical for good fertility. Number two, co-sync protocols may be fun to do, but my message is stop doing them. Okay, they just don't result in optimal fertility. The insemination window for optimal fertility is about 13 to 23 hours after the last GnRH of a timed AI program or after an estrus alert. Kind of the same. Okay. I think this requires generating lists of cows twice daily when using an activity monitoring system. And Cassie, that may be even more true for heifers. A lot of heifers are bred on once daily chalk and walk programs. But if you do that with sex semen, I don't think you're getting optimal fertility in that kind of a situation. And this is a little bit of a stretch. It's a little anecdotal because we didn't randomize cows to semen type. But what we observed was that there was no big difference in optimal timing of AI between conventional and sex-sorted semen. So again, I don't think it matters. I think we just want to be at the right time with both of those. So with that, Cassie, that's what I had to share with your audience today. I thank you guys for joining us. And if there's anybody live that wants to ask questions, I'd be glad to talk through those, Cassie.
Absolutely. So for our live listeners, just a reminder, you still ask your questions. I call it the continued button, to be continued button, the ... That's where you're going to click, and then you can tap into entering your question, and we'll bring it forward if it comes through. Just to set precedence here, as we're talking kind of that baseline of fertility. Hopefully we think we have a pretty good repro program at home. We think we're jiving, but if we need to set kind of like a baseline or a standard, what rate should we be achieving theoretically?
All right, that's it's a tougher question than it used to be because a lot of things affect conception rate, Cassie, and what,
Mhm.
so let me just run through a couple of the things. Parity. First lactation cows are more fertile than older cows. Okay. Semen type. And semen type is confounded with parity. Okay. So even though first lactation cows are the most fertile cows, that's where the most sex semen is used, which is going to drop that conception rate.
Sure.
So it gets dicey throwing numbers out. But in class, I kind of do this for the students. I like to see conception rates in the kind of mid 40% to 50 some percent. If you're above that, it's great.
Mm-hmm.
But that's just as an overall benchmark, kind of where I like to see them. If conception rates are in the less than 40% or mid 30% range, there's other issues going on. It's you'd go through those 4 buckets I talked about. Is it a timing of insemination problem? Is it a semen handling problem, male fertility or female fertility?
Absolutely. If we're not feeling that ish baseline, if you just laid out, rewind, start over.
Yes.
Let's put the wheels back on. Oh, great. I think this is great. I think we reiterated some of those tactical things to just keep people moving forward. But again, for our listeners out there, regardless if you're doing live or you're getting this to the tractor later, definitely always fill your questions in. And if it's directed towards Dr. Fricke, you can reach out to him directly. Or if you need help connecting, we can definitely bridge that gap for you. But again, to our listeners, this is your tool to utilize. Ask your questions, not only in today's discussion on all things repro, what are we moving forward and what's that next task or that next ceiling that we're going to crash and break through. So send through your creative ideas of what you want. I know we had a flood last week come through that I'm excited to find those new resources and tools for you as we continue to move forward. So as we wrap up today's program, again, thank you for tuning in. Thank you, Dr. Fricke, for joining us once again and kind of putting some of those parameters or kind of those checks and balances when we think of our repro programs to strive for. So I appreciate your time here today. But then again, thank you guys for your comments, your suggestions for future topics. And again, a special thank you to our partners that make not only the Dairy Signal possible, but the programs that you see PDP put on throughout the calendar year is made possible, again, not only by our members and their ideas, but the partners that help make it possible and attainable from a cost standpoint and even some of the resources that they're able to bring in. So thank you guys. Thank you for walking along all year long with professional dairy producers. We greatly appreciate it. One of those, not only are they a national partner, but they're also a partner in specifically the Dairy Signal this month. And again, a reminder and thank you to DMI, so our national checkoff program. You can get more details, more of the awesome things that they got going on for you as a dairy farmer at dairycheckoff.com. Without further ado, thank you for tuning in, and we'll see you again on the Dairy Signal.